Portland felt gray in every direction, but there was a different kind of quiet inside Ethan now. A heavy, tasteless silence that sat behind his ribs like a second person. He used to drive a shuttle on the interstate, hands steady, radio on, cracking jokes with the regulars. He used to hum while changing oil and used to plan weekends. Now his days were a list of small absences. He didn't answer texts. He didn't meet friends for coffee. He didn't open the blinds unless the sun forced him. He walked through the city like an apology. The crash happened on a Thursday. A delivery truck blew a light on the ramp. A motorcycle fishtailed, metal folded with that stupid final sound. Ethan woke up on the asphalt, blood salt stiff on his shirt, a hand that wouldn't unclench. There were people, crying, cursing, someone repeating a name he couldn't place. He remembered the smell of diesel and the kid with the lime green sneakers, the way one of the child's arms lay wrong. When the ambulances finished their siren concert, the world went back to sliding into place and life moved forward like it always does. He was lucky, they told him. Broken ribs, a punctured lung, a hand that would never be the same. The kid wasn't lucky. The kid died with somebody's hand on his shoulder in the back of an ambulance. People gave him practical things, groceries, polite visits, a doctor's note, and then they turned back to their own days. They did the correct things and walked away. Ethan tried to step back into normal and found the hole didn't fit him. Month after month he sank. He stopped picking up shifts, stopped showing up at the garage, stopped answering the dispatcher's calls. He let days stack like unused receipts in the center console. Sleep turned sideways. Mornings blurred into the gray of rainy evenings when Portland's lights felt less like coziness and more like accusation. Sometimes he stayed in bed and counted the hairline cracks on his ceiling until he could recite them aloud. Counting felt like work, therefore like achievement. It wasn't. His sister, who lived in Beaverton, would visit on Saturdays, sometimes bringing soup, sometimes a kind of quiet insistence. "You can't keep doing this," she said, practical and tired. "You need something to do." He'd nod or not answer. She called him stubborn, then called the rescue shelter 2 towns over, the one she insisted did actually good things. "You need to come by," she said on the second Saturday. "They brought an animal in today. They said he's stubborn but special." Ethan hated being told what to do. He hated being reduced to a project. He owed nobody anything. But after a year of quiet, when grief had layered on him like damp, he agreed to go. He figured, maybe seeing other people with problems would make his problem feel normal. He told himself stories on the drive there, rationalizations that were honest enough to keep him moving. The shelter was behind a gate plastered with adoption posters. A volunteer waved him through with a smile that had patience in the corners. The place smelled like soap and wet fur and something nostalgic, that mix that makes you think of the dog you had as a kid and all the other simple things that life used to hold. They led him past rows of kennels, through a corridor of eyes. At the back was a small yard and, under the shade of a broken picnic table, a shape that moved like a slow clock. He wasn't big. He wasn't small. He was a brown and black blur with a limp that finished in a healed stump where a front left leg should have been. One ear flopped. One eye had seen too much and looked like it had stopped asking. He sat at the yard's edge like a man who had been waiting and had stopped expecting anything. "That's him," the volunteer said. They called him Toby. Found him on the highway, hit and run. He was here for 6 months. People say he's aggressive or broken. The volunteer's tone was practiced, like reading a resume. Nobody wanted him. Ethan looked at the dog. The dog looked back, and in a way that felt both foolish and true, they recognized the same thing. An absence so loud it made your chest feel wrong. "I don't do people," Ethan said before he could stop himself. He'd rehearsed sentences about being busy, about not being ready. His voice came out flat even to him. "You don't have to," his sister said. "Just sit. Look at him." She didn't push. She offered a smile like someone who knows a good gamble when she sees one. He sat on the concrete slab. The dog didn't approach. He didn't flee. He kept an even, cautious distance. Sometimes he'd lift his snout as if to smell the air and then lower it without moving. He had the narrow dignity of something forced to be small to survive. The volunteer gave a little history. Hit by a car, treated, leg too damaged to save, then too spooked to trust. They were thinking euthanasia, the volunteer said. The vet refused. Said he deserved a chance. The volunteer's hands were marked by years of work. "We brought him here. He's improving. Slow. Improving," sounded like a steam whistle from a life Ethan used to believe in, a word with warmth. He said to no one in particular, but definitely to himself, "I can take him home." His sister reached in her bag like she does for the right thing and handed over a towel and a collar. "You sure?" she asked, generous with doubt. He nodded. On the ride back, the dog wrapped in a blanket on the back seat looked small and wary as a thing that had been minimized. Ethan watched him in the rear view, like someone trying to learn a new language. When they opened the door at Ethan's apartment, the dog's paws hit the threshold, and that was the first small act of courage, one wobble across a line. The first week was tangled. The dog wouldn't eat if Ethan was watching. He ate when left alone, when Ethan stepped out. He slept under the couch, a shadow flickering whenever the heater clicked on. The missing limb left a kind of ghost on the floor, an imprint of absence. Ethan kept the radio on because the sound might be therapy. The hum stood in for company. On the third night, the dog crawled out and sat 3 feet from Ethan's shoes. Ethan felt his chest tighten like a drum. He reached out, clumsy and apologetic, and his hand found the dog's back. Fur coarse, warm. The dog flinched, then, as if filing a new fact, stayed. It was ridiculous and miraculous. They named him Coco, short, blunt, because the shelter had called him something forgettable, and Ethan liked how the syllables fit between them. Coco was guarded. Coco was careful. He'd let Ethan touch him as long as Ethan didn't expect anything back. He'd close his eyes sometimes in the late light, as if sleeping, but listening with full attention. Ethan started doing things that looked like living. He washed Coco's mat every Wednesday and made a ritual of it. He boiled chicken, rinsed bowls, bought a cheap tennis ball, because he'd seen a kid on the bus toss one, and it looked like a practice in trust. Coco's lopsided chase at the ball made Ethan laugh in a way he'd forgotten how to. The soft, surprised laugh of someone rediscovering muscle memory for joy. Neighbors noticed. His sister noticed his shoulders uncurl a little. Folks who used to avoid him in the hallway now waved. It was slow, all edges being sanded down. Inside, the dull ache started to loosen with small, steady work. He started walking to the corner store for dog food, then staying to talk to the clerk. 10% lighter felt like a promise. But tension doesn't disappear. Coco flinched hard at hands, and one afternoon a teenager from the building, bored and careless, threw a rock toward where Coco always lay. The rock hit near the mat, and the dog leaped, barking. The kid laughed like that noise should mean something. Power, entertainment. Ethan's hands tightened on the railing. The memory of the wreck, of not reaching someone who didn't make it, came back cold and sharp. He stepped out and said, voice too bright, "Hey, don't do that." The kid spat some insult. Ethan's jaw twitched. He'd measured himself by outcomes all his life. Routes he could fix, problems he could solve. Now his chest thudded. He had practiced silence for months. Today he didn't walk away. The kid's swagger faltered. He backed off and left. Ethan exhaled like someone who had done something small and hard and won a retreat. That night Coco slept closer to Ethan's feet. Ethan let the feeling of being needed move through him like warm water. It wasn't salvation, it was a fact. Someone required his showing up. That fact altered his rhythm. Week by week, Ethan showed up. He took Coco to the clinic for an old surgery check. He signed release forms with hands that shook. He bought physiotherapy aids, learned how to help a 3-legged dog balance and hop. Sometimes Coco fell and yelped and hid for an hour. Those were the days when effort felt like punishment. But then there were afternoons when Coco waited by the door and thumped his tail like a sputtering engine, and Ethan walked out with him and felt 10% lighter than the month before. One rainy night, with thunder and streets slick as glass, Coco slipped out under the door while Ethan's back was turned and sprinted into the wet road. Ethan's breath went hollow. He ran barefoot on the slick pavement, calling, tensing as cars skidded by. He saw Coco in headlights, flattened by shadows. Then a truck swung wide, and someone's beam caught the dog. For a second Ethan thought he might lose him. That violence and haste would end it. He dove, scraped his palms, grabbed Coco under the ribs, wrapped him and sobbed into fur. Neighbors came out, lights on, calling, a flashlight's beam carving a small mercy. They checked the dog, offered blankets, sat until his shivers eased. Later, when calm stitched itself back, Ethan held Coco close and muttered, "You damn animal. You almost killed me." Coco's eyes were steady, unblinking. That night became a hinge. Ethan realized his life could have fear and still be worth the messy business of trying. He learned bravery is not clean. It can be a half-sob and a stiff, persistent willingness to go fetch a scared thing. He started volunteering at the shelter, walking timid dogs, helping feed the aggressive ones, understanding in a slow, stubborn way what little tasks rebuild a life. He met other people there who were also quietly broken. A teacher who had lost a student, a woman whose marriage had run out of whispers, a retired firefighter who fed strays and watched the horizon the way someone watches the sea. They talked about routine and appointments and the logistics of feeding mouths and cleaning up accidents, mundane things that add up to steadying a day. Those folks handed Ethan a vocabulary for living. Routine is medicine. Doing little things every day keeps you moving. Ethan and Coco on the apartment landing. The city below, a distant roar muted by height. Coco rests his head on Ethan's knee and breathes the even rhythm of a creature who's begun to find his bearings. Ethan stares at the dog and allows himself an improbable thought. Maybe he can keep this up. Maybe survival can be a job he's paid in small acts of showing up. Time moved like work, slow, measured by small tasks. Ethan woke for reasons that knew nothing about avoiding the day. Coco would paw the blanket in the morning, a precise instrument. Demand, reminder, a low-grade law. Ethan learned mealtime rhythms and the hour where lights slanted across the balcony and made Coco curl like a tiny warm bundle. Those weren't triumphs. They were stitches. Stitches make things whole enough. They walked to the city park by the river. People stopped and smiled. A dangerous currency for someone trained to hide. Kids loved Coco, and kids forced adults to feel. Coco would accept pats from careful hands and chase a ball with lopsided joy only a survivor develops. Watching him move like that, balancing and compensating instead of giving up, gave Ethan a picture of himself doing the same. Standing, adjusting, carrying on felt possible for the first time, a real option. Ethan took a part-time shift at a local hardware store, not because he thought he should be driving again, but because manual work steadied him. Measuring, handing screws, wrapping parcels. The tasks were small and often anonymous and perfectly necessary. He liked being useful. He took Coco in on slow days, and people would murmur, "He looks happier." A coil of pride loosened. The twist in the story wasn't cinematic. It arrived in small shifts. A laugh at the shop that didn't feel like pity, the willingness to make plans, and answering a friend's invite without automatic decline. He took animal first aid classes at the shelter and learned how to rehab traumatized dogs. The work required patience and gentle firmness, skills he'd thought lost. He met other volunteers who'd also come back from dark places and who spoke an honest dialect. Small acts, repeated, bring repair. A journalist from a local paper called One Day, looking for stories about recovery. The shelter asked for volunteers. Ethan almost said no. He'd made a life of shrinking. But then he thought of the neighbor kid who'd once thrown a rock and of the parents at the clinic who'd asked if volunteers could come speak to families about coping. He told his story. The piece ran in a modest column with a photo capturing Coco mid-lick. Comments rolled in. Blankets, a physiotherapy mat, a bag of food. A woman messaged, "My uncle won't leave the house since his stroke. Could he come see?" That small task was a rope thrown across a gap. Changes didn't happen overnight. Months have a stubborn way of clinging. There were nights Ethan wake with the steering wheel's feel in his hands and his chest clenching. Some mornings guilt about the kid with the lime green sneakers returned like a shadow. On those days he walked to the shelter or sat on a bench in the park until the city's hum was tolerable. He'd count pigeons or watch kids jump rope and feel tiny contributions pile like coins. Coco's rehab had a final test. The shelter suggested fostering him to prepare for a permanent home. Ethan could have agreed and handed Coco to a stranger, trusting the shelter to find the right fit. He could also keep Coco and say yes to this life he'd pieced together. He sat with the decision 3 nights the way one sits with a choice that will set the edge of your future. On the last night before deciding, he stood on the balcony over the river and thought of the sound of traffic and boats, of light across water, of Coco warming his feet. Coco lay near his boots, breathing easy, and Ethan felt a clear, hard thing in his chest. He had created an economy of small things. A job, shelter shifts, friends who answer calls. He had enough scaffolding. "No," he told himself aloud. "You're staying." He called the shelter and told them. The intake worker paused, maybe expecting someone to hedge. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan said. "I'm sure." When he hung up, something enormous and real sat in his chest. Responsibility that wasn't prison, but a chosen tether now. "I will show up." The world would ask for more sometimes, but offering would feel different when it came from inside instead of being owed. Months later, at a small shelter gathering, Coco sat center like a small hero. Children circled and volunteers nodded at Ethan by name. His sister sat by, smiling like she'd been waiting for this. For the first time in a long time, Ethan could talk about the crash and the kid and not choke. He told them the truth. He'd carried that accident like a stone in his pocket and nearly let it sink him until a small, needy creature forced him to choose differently. "You saved him," someone offered. "No," Ethan answered, quietly sure. "He saved me." They laughed, not mockingly but softly, because rescue often flips the script. They clapped, small, honest applause. The resolution wasn't erased. He still had nights where his breath stuck. He still saw flashes of the accident. He visits hospitals sometimes and sits with families dealing with trauma because there's a way to sit with someone who's still in that place. A quiet presence that's both permission and proof. That work he never imagined doing fit now. It made sense. 2 years from when he first met Coco, there's a photo on the hardware store wall. Coco mid-leap after a rag ball, ears back, tail a metronome of pure joy. Ethan's in the background grinning like a man whose face remembers how to meet the sun. He still carries the crash, an internal scar, a memory on loop. But the sound of Coco's nails on the floor is a daily repair kit. Coco didn't cure guilt. He didn't make the world fair. What he did do, perfectly and simply, was make staying matter. He needed food, walks, and a hand during thunder. He needed someone to show up. Ethan showed up. In those little acts of care, a life mended enough. On a slow afternoon at a bus stop, a young man asked how Coco relearned to walk. Ethan thought of months of patience and falls, physiotherapy, and the afternoons of repetition. He shrugged. He learned because he had to. So did I. The young man walked off with that small instruction lodged somewhere. Ethan stroked Coco's head. The dog thumped his stub of a tail and rolled to show his belly. They were not whole in the absolute way stories sometimes promise. They were whole enough to face the next day. That, in the end, is often the point. Coco taught him to come back in the mornings, to make space on the couch, to let a little light in, to be present. Sometimes rescue looks one way. More often it's mutual. The rescued recover, then nudge the rescuer back into the world. Showing up for someone else, even when you wonder if you're worth it, makes you worth the trouble. If that's not small grace, what is? Ethan would tell you, with a blunt grin and a cigarette he doesn't light, that the dog saved him. Coco would reply, if he could, by wagging and rolling for belly rubs. The world remains loud and imperfect, but inside the small apartment, with dust motes catching the late light like tiny roads, 2 ragged things chose to keep walking together. That was enough. The lesson: sometimes the life you think you must save is the life that saves you. Rescue isn't a heroic monopoly. It's a messy shared economy. Show up. Keep showing up. Over time, the pieces arrange themselves. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share.